It's ironic that Will stood up today, a nationally representative debater, and complained about how horrible debate was, and that actually slowing down lawmaking so that MPs can consider the local and national trade-offs that must be made in any passage of legislation is actually a really horrible thing, and that we shouldn't consider every viewpoint from each separate region, and that actually we should drive legislation through on the basis of the personalities of the leaders of parties. On this side of the House, we would prefer a world in which legislation is responsibly considered by MPs representing individual constituencies for its local and national implications, not a world in which one of the fastest legislatures in the world, New Zealand's, is made even faster and less scrutiny is put on legislation. 3 questions in the debate so far, Madam Speaker. The first, how does this affect the speed and quality of the legislature and executive government? The second, the legitimacy of party representation as opposed to individual representation. And thirdly, the quality of MPs as they turn up to Parliament. I'll then extend our case with a flip point on why we reduce partisanship amongst the populace. Let's talk first, Madam Speaker, about the speed and quality of the legislature and the government. Their entire response was that it was bad that we told you clearly that when we have individual MPs who are responsible to 20,000-ish voters in each of the 120 constituencies, rather than 60 blokes in smoky rooms in the constituency parties, that gets better political outcomes because they must consider the local implications of their policy, otherwise they'll get turfed out. Because voters won't face the cost of switching party and therefore admitting that they're voting for a party with a completely different political ideology. Remember, they only have really 5 to choose from. Instead, they will be able to switch individuals, which is a far less stressful decision to make. Therefore, they're under a much greater incentive to do good legislation. His point was that actually we're just going to slow down the passage of good legislation through all of this horse trading. But if it's good legislation, won't 60 MPs come out in support of it? If it is so self-evidently good and there is so little need for debate and it's actually totally fine that we pass it under urgency like we would today, won't 60 MPs come and support it? And if there are bills that are actually being stopped by this, doesn't that suggest that they hurt a significant minority, at least, of New Zealanders? Doesn't that suggest that actually those are bills which are worth considering a bit more? And his point that actually decisive action is really important. No, it isn't. Sometimes it is. It's not all the time. Sometimes decisive action is important. That's why we have an executive government, which has significant delegated power through legislation, through orders in council that it can make, like Jacinda Ardern re-registering most semi-automatic weapons as military-style semi-automatics. But when in full-style legislation, actually, when the Parliament has considered that these are changes they're not willing to delegate to the executive government, those are areas in which we need greater consideration. And then we heard that actually local and national issues are really bad, and the idea that some people will just focus on all of their local issues. The thing is, New Zealand is created up of a collection of localities. So if it helps a significant majority of the localities, it is generally a good point. And if it has a significant harm on one locality, that locality's MP should be able to say, no, thank you, should be able to say, no, this is a really bad harm, and I'm going to vote against this, and I'm also going to vote against everything else you want, because this is really bad for my constituency. Why shouldn't each of the 120 individually sized electorates have the ability to influence national policy making in that way? And the fact is, all they're trying to do is maintain the speed at which we make legislation in this country. We have unbridled power, and they would not bridle it at all. Second question then is the legitimacy of party representation in the abstract. All they told you was that parties are vehicles for ideology and that ideology is a reasonable place on which for people to vote. We don't disagree. We say that if people want to make their decisions on the basis of ideology, we're fine with that. They can pick the MP that says, hey, I'm a liberal conservative if he would have been a nat under the other side. Or, hey, I'm a greenie if he, well, not a greenie, I'm a progressive environmentalist if he would have been a greenie, right? The idea that that is totally a legitimate point of view, but the idea that our entire choice between people, that our entire choice should be decided by those ideological diehards in the parties, that ideology should be the only differentiator between MPs, is just wrong. Actually, when we're faced with really difficult decisions, we should consider the personality of the MP, their engagement with the local community, whether they have a track record of standing up for the community. The idea that actually on their side of the house ideology is the only important decision making is just wrong. And then they said actually manifestos are really important. Fine. If MPs want to commit to a set program of policies they're going to do, they should go ahead and do that. We don't see how that's mutually exclusive. Maybe the idea that there should be collective action on manifestos is, but we don't think that is necessarily a good thing. Why shouldn't people be able to come up with individual manifestos for each party? Why is it the case that there are only 5 national manifestos which are the acceptable national ones? Why shouldn't each individual constituency have a manifesto which fits with them? Then we come down to the question of who gets better MPs. And they seem to think that those 60 blokes in the constituency Labour Party or the constituency National Party are a better judge of character, they are a better picker of good MPs. I mean, tell that to Aaron Gilmore, right? They pick some pretty bad MPs. The idea that actually 60 people whose only qualification is that they paid this $70 Victory for Labour membership or they paid their $20 a year National Party membership are better at picking MPs than 20,000 voters who will be constantly barraged by messaging throughout the election, who will have lots of coverage in it in their local media, is just ridiculous. We are Democrats. We say those 20,000 people are probably better judges of character than the few constituency party members which are choosing MPs on their side of the house. But then, why then does this reduced partisanship amongst the populace? As it stands, politics is viewed by many as a batting game between a green team, a blue team, a red team, a yellow team, and a black team, I think their colour is. Instead, what we think our side of the house says is actually it is about the trade-offs between different people's stances on various different issues. It is a collection of individuals who are making decisions for the entire country. We would say that actually when we take politics away from being this nationally televised sports game of gladiator combat in Parliament, we actually improve that sort of engagement that they wanted to talk about a lot. But also, we create more considered policy making. When people aren't just making their minds up on whether a capital gains tax is a good or a bad idea, based on whether they voted for Bill English or Jacinda Ardern in the last election, we think they're going to consider these issues more, they're going to come up with better public policy debate. The red team and the blue team aren't the right people to be deciding how to run New Zealand. Instead, it's each of the 4 million New Zealanders.